All right, question 1 on this unit cumulative assessment says the fare for a taxi cab is a $2 flat fee plus an additional $1.50 for each mile. Which equation represents the total cab fare in dollars? So what I have to do is I have to write an equation for this. So sometimes it's good to write it in words. The fare, which means the cost of something. Right? What is it the cost of that we're looking for? The cost of a what? Taxi ride. So to get a taxi cab, right, you're going to have to pay $2 up front plus an additional $1.50. So that's 1.50 or just 1.5 times the number of miles that you drive. So if I drive 1 mile, it's $1.50. If I go 2 miles, it's $3. 3 miles, it'd be $4.50 and so forth. Okay? So which equation represents the total cab fare in dollars? So I wonder if they're going to write it in words like fare in miles and all this other stuff, or cost in miles. So look at my first answer choice. It's in terms of X and Y. So apparently, X is going to be equal to the number of miles that you are driving. Okay? And then Y in this problem is going to be the cost of the cab or the taxi. Okay? So that's going to be the total cost. So if we rewrite this equation as the total cost, that would be Y, right? Because that's the cost, would be equal to 2 plus 1.5 times X. Now, typically I wouldn't write it in that form, Y is equal to 2 plus 1.5x. That is in slope-intercept form. Typically is how you write these things, so it should be Y is equal to the slope is the rate of change. Rate of change and slope is basically the same thing, so it would be 1.5 times x plus 2. That's the equation. So do I see any answer choices that shows that is the equation? Y is equal to 1.5x plus 2? Looks like B, right? What about C? That doesn't look like that in C. D doesn't look like that. But let's make sure that these x's and y's are representing the right things. Y represents the total fare. Is that what it is? Y is the cost. Total fare is another word for cost. So yes, that's what Y represents. And X represents the miles that's traveled. X represents the miles that's traveled. Yes. The miles driven, miles traveled, same thing. So my correct answer there should be B as in boy. Any questions about 1? All right, let's look at question 2 then. Which of the following equations represents the graph below? Well, what is this graph of? It's a graph of a horizontal line. So we have to remember the graph of a horizontal line is that x is equal to some value or y is equal to some value. Do y'all remember? It's always y is equal to some value. And what is y always equal to? 3 here. This point is at 1, 3, 2, 3, 3, 3, 4, 3, 5, 3, 6, 3, negative 1, 3, negative 2, 3. What is y always equal in every point that I put on that graph? Y is equal to 3. Now, if you want to verify that, guys, what's great about your calculator is that to verify that, I could just go to the graph, right, and go to menu, graph edit entry, right, and graph a relation. And the relation I want to graph just to check this is y is equal to 3 to see is it really a horizontal line. So if I hit enter, I've already got 2 lines graphed in this same graph, and I just graph y is equal to 3 right there. You see that? So I didn't have to do it on a clean graph to see that. I just graphed it on the one that was already there by going to menu, graph edit entry, and just graph a relation. So we can check to make sure that we did that right, and obviously we did, so that's G. All right, 3. Which property should be used next in the solution process? So do you need to know the steps in solving equations? Absolutely. And you need to know which step that's called. So first of all, what happened in this? Here's my original problem. What did they do in step 1? What did they do to this to get to this? Do y'all see what they did? Did they distribute? In this problem, they did not distribute. What did they do? They combined like terms. So that's 3x plus 5 is equal to 7 times x minus 1 plus 4. So after they combine like terms, what do you think the next step should be in the problem? What should be the next step in the problem? Distribute. So you should distribute the 7 to the x and the 7 to the 1. So the next step in this problem should be the distributive property, so it should end up being 3x plus 5 is equal to 7x minus 7 minus 4. Because you got to take the 7 times the x to get 7x and the 7 times the 1. So you need to know your steps of solving equations. Okay? Alright, let's go to problem 4. The formula for how far a moving object travels in terms of the rate or speed at which it moves and the travel time or how long it's moving is this formula. The distance is equal to the rate times the time. Now this is not a difficult formula. It's like driving a car going 60 miles an hour for 1 hour. How far could you go? 60 miles, right? If I went 60 miles an hour for 2 hours, how far could I go? 60 times 2 is 120. You get the idea? So if it was 60 miles an hour for 3 hours, that's my rate of speed times my time. That's all that means. So D stands for the distance, R stands for the rate, and T stands for the time that you're driving. Rearrange the quantities in this formula to give a new formula for the travel time in terms of the distance and rate of time. So what this wants to do is this wants you to solve this equation for T. How do you get T by itself if you're just solving an equation? Well, just think of that as my variable. And to isolate the variable, I would have to undo the multiplication of the R. And the opposite of multiplying by R is to divide by R. And what you do to one side, you do to the other. So the distance divided by the rate is equal to my time. So do I see that anywhere? Absolutely. To solve that in terms of T, which is the time, it's the distance divided by the rate. Follow? Alright, so let's look at problem 5. The domain of f of x. What is the domain? Another word for domain is the input values. The axis, right? Another word for that is the independent values. Right? So the domain of this function is -1, 0, 2. And my function rule is that f of x is equal to 3x plus 2. How do I find the range? Well, I input the x's into the function to find the output. Range is just what is my outputs if I entered those input values. So I'd have to find f of -1, figure out what that is, f of 0, figure out what that is, and f of 2 and figure out what that is. So all that means is to plug those in there. Now I could do this with pencil and paper and take 3 times -1, which is -3 plus 2. What's -3 plus 2? -1. Plug in a 0. 3 times 0 is 0 plus 2 is 2. Plug in a 2. 3 times 2 is 6. Plus 2 would give you 8. So I'd get a -1, -1, a 2, -1, 2, so it's not A, and then an 8, and then an 8. -1, 2, 8. -1, 2, 8, so it's got to be B. Now, y'all know you could have found that in your calculator, right? By cutting on your calculator. Go to your home screen, go to New Document. Don't save the last one, add a graph. Look, plug in f of x, or y, is equal to 3x plus what? 2. Hit enter. Go to a table. How do I pull up a table of values? That's really what we're doing. We got these inputs. What are my outputs for these inputs? Hit Control T. And if I input a -1, so move my little cursor there to the left. If I input a -1, what was my output? -1. Input a -1, my output's a -1, just like here. Here. What if I input a 0? My output is a 2. What if I input a 2? What's my output? An 8. So my calculator will come up with these inputs and outputs, just like these inputs and outputs, to help me find that answer by going to a table. Do you understand that? So use your technology to help you find answers when you take this little test tomorrow. All right, so let's look at 6. Solve the inequality. How do I solve an inequality? This inequality is negative. X plus 6 is greater than a negative 2x plus 4. I solve an inequality exactly the same way I solve equations. I distribute, combine like terms, put my variables on one side, constants on the other, and then step 4, isolate the variable. The exact same way. There's only one difference. Is if you ever multiply or divide by a negative, you have to flip the inequality, to flip the direction of the inequality. So if I do that, it would flip. So step one in solving this is to distribute. So I have a negative 1 times a 2x, so that's a negative 2x. A negative times a positive. Same thing as a negative 1 times a positive 4 is a negative 4. All right, so I've distributed. Next step, combine like terms. No like terms on the left and the right to combine. Because that's a variable with a constant, can't combine it. Variable with a constant, can't combine it. So then now I get my letters on one side, numbers on the other. So to get rid of this negative 2x, I would add a 2x. Add a 2x. So what's a negative 2x, or excuse me, a positive 2x plus a negative 1 would be a positive what? 1x, or just x. Plus 6 is greater than a negative 4. Now last step is to get this constant over here with this constant, so I subtract 6, so x would be greater than a negative 4. Combined with a negative 6 is a negative what? 10. So x is greater than a negative 10. So I didn't have to flip any inequalities. So I'm good. Okay? So that's F. Alright, let's go to problem number 7. Which is not the graph of a function? How do you know which of these is not or is a function? If it's a function, it's going to pass what test? The vertical line test. If I put vertical lines down here, it only hits 1 point, so yes, that's a function. Is this a function? Yes or no? Yes, that's a function. Any vertical line you put down there, it would pass the test. It only hits 1 point. Is this a function? Absolutely, yes. The one that's not a function is D, because if I put a line straight down it, it hits 2 points. For that one input of a 2, it had an output of a 1 point something and a negative 1 point something, which is a function. It would not be a function if you input a value of a 1 and get 2 different outputs. So that is not a function. Okay, let's look at question 8. The graph of f of x is equal to 2/3 x plus 1 is shown below. It's in slope-intercept form. My y-intercept is a positive 1, and my slope is 2/3. So I rise up 2, run to the right 1, 2, 3, and there's another point on the graph. All day long I can go up 2, to the right 3, and there'll be another point on the graph, and so forth. Okay? Which of the following describes the effects of the graph of f of x when you have a g of x function that is that entire function minus 3? So what that does to a function is it would take this function, the f of x function, does everybody agree that's the f of x function? And if I subtract 3, what that's saying is every y value would be moved down 1, 2, 3 units. So just my y values move down 1, 2, 3 units. This would be moved down 1, 2, 3 units. That's all it's saying. This one would be moved down 1, 2, 3 units. And there's the new graph of g of x. So in mathematical terms, this just said to get a new g of x function, you move everything down 3 units. Okay, so which of the effects is it? It's the same slope, isn't it? Did I change the tilt of it by moving it down? No. So this one has a steeper slope? Absolutely not. The graph of g of x has a flatter slope? No, it's not changed. The slope's the same. The graph of g of x has the same slope as the graph of g of x has the same slope as the graph of f of x, and a different y-intercept of negative 2? Yeah, it's the same slope but different y-intercept. Yes. And obviously it's not j. The graph of g of x has the same slope as the graph of f of x and a different y-intercept of a positive 4. No, the y-intercept's not a positive 4. It would be a negative 2 when you move it down. Y'all follow that? Alright, so look at this one. This one's a calculator problem, number 9. Find the line of best fit for this data. How do you do that? How do you find a line that goes through this data? Yeah. So cut on your calculator. Go to your home screen. Go to New Document. Don't save my last one. And then we're going to add lists and spreadsheets. We're going to title this X and this Y. And then my X is 1. What else is X? 4, 7, 9. Likewise, we'll do the same thing here. So I got a 0.9, 2.8, 3.7, 4.6. Going to go to an empty cell and do what? A linear regression in slope-intercept form. So how do I do that? How do I come up with a line that goes through those points? Hit Menu. Go to Statistics. Stat Calculations. And a linear regression is 3. And then my X list was X. My Y list is Y. And save the function as F1. That's okay. Hit Enter. And there it is. There's the equation of a line that goes through those points. You want to see a picture of it? So there's my slope, there's my y-intercept. Slope, y-intercept. To see a picture of it, you just go to Control, add a page, which is Doc. And then we're going to add the graph. And it's already graphed right there. It's not right there. It's at F1. We said to save it to F1. So to graph, I got to click that little box right there to cut on by hitting Enter. And there's the graph. Look, there's even the function rule. Y equals 0.446x plus 6 or 0.657, which is answer choice what? A. How good of a fit is it? Does it go through those points perfectly? How do I know? Let's go back to the other page right here. So hit Control left, or you can just move your cursor over here if that doesn't work. Boom. And then you go down here and you look at your correlation coefficient. That R value. The closer that is to 1, the better the fit. So does it go through the points perfectly? Yes or no? No. There's some points above and below that line. So if I were to graph this thing, there'd be some points above and below. But they'd be really close to the line because my R value is really close to 1. You got it? That's called my correlation coefficient. Hopefully you remember that. So let's look at question 10. What is the slope-intercept form of this equation? You better know how to do that. So put that equation in slope-intercept form. How do I do that? I just solve for what? Y. That's it. You've got to be able to solve for y. So here's my equation. It's 3y minus 8x is equal to 12. How do I get y by itself? Move the 8x over, so I get 3y is equal to positive 8x plus 12, because once it jumps across the equal to sign, it becomes a positive. It changes its signs. It was a negative, now it's positive. And then now divide by 3. Divide by 3. So y is equal to 8 divided by 3 is 8 thirds x. And then you got to take 12 divided by 3, which is 4. So now it's in slope-intercept form. This is my slope. This is my y-intercept, which is a 4. Which one says that? G. Okay? Let's try to get 11 done. The graph below shows the distance and time of Roberto's car trip. Which of the following represents the relationship between Roberto's distance and time? So all I got to do is find the relationship between the distance and the time. So it looks like it's a direct variation in the form y is equal to k times x. So I just got to figure out my k value by taking one point and dividing it by another point. So if I look here, it looks like it goes right through this point, which is at the coordinates 5, 300. So to get my k value in a direct variation, it's always y divided by x. So what's 300 divided by 5? 60. So this represents y is equal to 60 times x. And the only answer choice that says that is C. Okay? We good with that? How are we doing on time? Yes?
Would number 10 be H?
Oh yeah, we told it should be H. I wrote down 8 thirds and there you go. I wrote down 8 thirds and put 3 8. It should be H. We doing good? We got time to do another one? 12. Which of the following is the equation? Which of the following is an equation of a line that passes through the point 2, 2? So it goes to that point 2, 2, and it's parallel to this one. So if it's parallel to it and it goes to that point, then they have to have the same slope. So I'll show you this one to be done. So I'd use the point slope form. Plug it into this. Y minus y sub 1 is equal to the slope times x minus x sub 1. Y minus the y coordinate of the point is 2 is equal to the slope, and for the slopes to be, or these lines to be parallel, they got to have the same slope. So if this is a 3, this slope is a 3, times x minus the x coordinate of the point, which is 2, and the y coordinate is 2. And then now to solve it, just get y by itself. So move that 2 across. So this would be 3 times x minus 2 in parentheses plus 2. And then now distribute the 3 through. So it would be 3 times x is 3x. 3 times the negative 2 is a negative 6 plus 2. And so my answer would be y is equal to 3x. What's a negative 6 plus 2? Negative 4. So that should be G. Alright, I guess we'll stop there for today. Finish this up and be ready for your test tomorrow.